Hi, and welcome to my channel. As promised, a couple of years ago, here's the continuation of my building a 10x8 camera thread. With New Year over, I can update you with all of my progress. Let's get into it. This all began way back when I was experimenting with building bellows. The ability to build good quality bellows is at the very heart of being able to make large format cameras. And I've made a couple of sets of bellows from scratch now. One in 5x7 and of course now one in 10x8. Learning all the time. I was determined to build a practical 10x8 camera and I started laying plans over 3 years ago. This became a bit closer still to my heart after my father passed away in the autumn. He'd built several large format cameras for process work when I was a kid, and I really wanted to follow in his footsteps and try and honour the legacy of engineering he taught me. What had gotten in the way of those plans I made was first of all finding my half-plate 5x7 Kodak Specialist camera for £100. And then getting used to handling that larger format film size after using 5x4. Then of course I found my 1924 Kodak 2D 5x7. And restoring that took up still more of my time. Still, it was all great practice. I made my 10.8 bellows over 2 years ago, but they've been languishing on a shelf in my workshop all that time while I got my chops straight with 5x7. I had a false start by attempting to build a router table using a cheap Chinese mini router so that I could finger joint my camera body out of hardwood. But after the incredibly rubbish router died on the first joint I tried, I backburnered that whole approach. Then a problem occurred that actually wound up as a slice of luck. In my workshop, I have a rather large Chinese 50-watt laser cutter that has spent its time for the last 10 years cutting mostly vulcanized fibre. To be honest, despite how useful this laser was, it's always been a bit disappointing due to it being very slow and running out of power, cutting any more than a couple of millimetres of fibreboard or ply. As luck would have it, age caught up with both my laser tube and its power supply at the same time, necessitating me ordering both and learning how to fit and fettle a laser tube and its power supply, with all the scary 15,000 volts and beam alignment involved with that. Anyway, it was much easier than I thought, and when I fired up the laser for the first time, there was a bit of an issue. With the settings I'd been using for years, it was way too powerful, perhaps in the order of 3 or 4 times more. It incinerated work rather than cut it. With some rethinking of power and cutting speed settings, suddenly I could precision cut 13mm plywood as if it wasn't even there. This immediately got me to thinking I could laser cut a ply-bodied 10.8 camera far more easily than try to adapt my already built mini router table to take my other huge 1600-watt plunge router. The focus mechanism that would be at the heart of the camera was based on 2 CNC linear guide rail bearings and helical gear bearings that I sourced on Amazon, and again these have been sitting on my shelf for a couple of years. So I started busily designing. Unfortunately, I made a couple of oversights that would come back and haunt me, and whilst not being project killers, are a bit of a pain in the neck, and have meant that I've had to do some redesigning on the fly as I've gone on with the project. But anyway, designing and cutting the parts was fairly easy using my usual ancient copy of CorelDRAW and the marvellous Lightburn laser control software. I also managed to buy a new old stock 10.8 film holder for a very good price to give me sizes to work from when I build the back. I cracked on with making the inner end support frames for both ends of the bellows and gluing them in. This whole process is covered in fair detail in my rebuild of my Kodak 2D and replacing its bellows, so I won't go too deeply into it here, except to say I got absolutely covered in contact adhesive, and by the time I actually did it on the 2D bellows later on, I was much better at it. So, I cut the body and front panels, my newly tuned up laser making very short work of the 9mm ply I was using for the project. Everything fitted up nicely, and gluing up the body was pretty easy using sash clamps. However, the A3 size limit of my laser cutting table meant that, for example, while the 10 by 10 hole in the camera backboard could easily be laser cut, the outside had to be cut and planed to size old school style, with a tenon saw and a vintage Stanley No. 4 plane. It was possibly all this handwork that caused my design oversight that meant I didn't glue the body backplate in, leaving a recess for the back I had yet to build. This means I'll have to glue on an edge strip to make a proper light seal. The other design issue was I forgot that as I was building a T-shaped baseboard, I would need to make extension pieces out on the rear standard supports to hold some sort of support and locking adjustment arms for back tilt. As you can see on one image, I bought some aluminium to make the rear standard supports, but they turned out to be way heavier than using plywood, so this may wind up being cut in half lengthways and made into the required rear standard adjustment arms. I always knew this was going to be a bit of an evolutionary process rather than making a Mark I prototype and then a Mark II, etc. This camera design is quite modular. The bellows are easily removable from back and front standard with screws, and the focusing mechanism can be taken out as a whole unit. I can swap out parts as I come up with ideas for improvement without having to start again on a new camera. Yes, I realise the focusing rails are way too long and I need to chop them down, but as they are high-grade stainless steel, I had to buy specific cut-off wheels to cope. I'm waiting for better weather to go out into my workshop yard and use my 5-inch grinder away from things that will get damaged by sparks and metal particles. So, as of January 2026, I have a camera around 90% ready to go. I need to build the rising, crossing front supports, build a 10/8 back, which will be simply a scaled up version of the one I already made in my Restoring a 5x7 travel camera episode. The weight and bulk of the camera has crept up during the build process, and I'm currently looking at ways to trim off some pounds. But I'm not too worried. Again, the modular design allows me to try out new ideas as I come up with them. I have a couple of lenses that will both easily cover 10/8. Both are unfortunately without shutters, so that's another project. Well, that's the progress to date as of January 2026. As soon as I get some time, I shall be straight back into the workshop to get to work on making the front standard rise and fall mechanism and making the back, which, as I say, will be more or less in the style that I've already produced for my 5x7 travel camera. As we go along, I'm going to be putting all the contacts and files that I can make available in the free section of my Patreon. So anybody who wants to come along can follow along the Patreon link in the description and take a look at the sources I've used for components, etc. so far. If there's enough enthusiasm for it, I will produce a set of plans for the camera once I've completed everything in the way that I think's best and we've got a fully working end product. That will be put in the paid section. That's worth the money, I think, anyway. So, if you've enjoyed this content, perhaps you'll hit the like button. And maybe you'll think about subscribing, because it does the channel a great deal of good and it puts a big smile on my face as well. There'll be plenty more in the new year on both the 10/8 project and all the other things that you know and love from this channel. And so, until I see you again, take care of yourselves and keep taking pictures.